Jonny, we are live. Thank you so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Venture City.
Yeah, excited to be here. Big fan of what you're working on and happy to kind of tell my story and have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, what a great starting point then. Why don't you kick things off by sharing a little bit more about yourself and what you're working on with literally helping startups?
Sure thing. So I'm a former founder and current founder, and I've been in this startup space for a long time. Started back when I was like 18 or 19, working at a sales job at an early stage tech startup that was a research spin out, and just absolutely fell in love with building startups and building companies. Growing up, my dad was an entrepreneur and still is, kind of more in the manufacturing space, but I just liked the sort of holistic nature of just being at the top and running companies. And I think that startups are really efficient beings and entities that don't really have resources to waste. Got involved in the accelerator space for a while, went ahead and bootstrapped my own startup from idea to fruition, failed, which we can talk about in a
As
bit.
most do.
Yeah, exactly. And then, about a year ago, a coworker at the time and I sat down, Rob McIntosh, and we said, there has to be a better way to help startups. And we loved working with startups, but we hated the model that was so, dependent on taking money or taking lots of equity and not providing that much value. And so we started literally helping startups, and we help startups for free.
That's awesome. So just to take a step back, when you say, your model is a little bit different than you're saying like a traditional accelerator program, what is, specific to how you're different? You're saying that the fees are different. Is the advice different?
Yeah. So what we noticed was so much of the accelerator model and the incubator model was kind of dependent on saying, okay, like there's a right way to build a startup, or there's sort of this sort of regimented curriculum or process that every founder has to go through. And what we found is that every founder is at a different stage. And so we kind of wanted to say this is sort of like an individualized, we're calling it a startup catalyzer. So we're saying, all right, we meet you where you're at. Some founders are just an idea and they need to do problem discovery and they need to figure out who their customers will be and start to sort of figure out what their MVP will look like. Other companies we work with are Series A startups that have millions of dollars in revenue, are growing fast, and they just need investor intros and kind of some pitch tweaking. And so we kind of wanted to say, instead of having this sort of course and curriculum that's a little bit more structured and regimented, Rob and I meet you where you're at and say, okay, what are you sort of struggling with the most, and what is sort of currently keeping you from really being investable? And so we kind of provide an individualized action plan to say, all right, here's where you're at right now. Let's see what you need to do to get to a place where investors will be really interested. And then once you get there, we say, okay, great. And we start introducing you to investors.
Oh, that's awesome. Because I'm sure you have a really strong network after all of your, many years of experience within the space. But that being said, what trends have you noticed with challenges that founders might be encountering?
Yeah, it is all over the place. We noticed that so many people want to raise money right away. And it's
Mhm.
like, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and try to find, an angel investor. But the truth of the matter is you have to build something worth investing in. And I think that that's the biggest thing that people miss. So one of
And
the
when you
biggest,
say worth investing in, are you saying revenue generating?
I'm not necessarily saying revenue generating, although it helps a lot.
Yeah.
I'm moreover saying like you need to have users, you need to have traction in whatever form that takes, right? Like, there's this founder I know. He's building a really cool company. Quick shout out to Luke DeHaas, and he's building it's like a Venmo in Canada, and they've got a bunch of other components. He had 50,000 people on his wait list before his product was built.
Wow.
So if you're at the pre-seed stage, there are things you can do, but it takes a lot of effort, and it's a real grind to sort of get there. And we also have companies that are doing, a couple $1 million at the Series A stage. So at each stage, what investable looks like is very different.
I like that a lot. So again, I'm sure you've seen a lot of different stages, worked with a lot of different founders. What kind of advice would you give founders and entrepreneurs, more generally speaking?
Yeah, I think that there's sort of two big pieces of advice I have. Focus on building. So many people are focused on investing at the earliest stages, and we notice that that's a huge waste of time. They'll have hundreds of meetings if they're sort of good storytellers and good, networkers, but they won't have anybody actually cutting them checks
Mhm.
because all the investors say you're too early, you need to build. So kind of step one, always be building. Sort of advice point number two is don't raise money when you're running out, which is the biggest thing I notice, is that the reason people are raising, they're like, I need money, I need money, I need money. And it's so desperate, and investors feel that. So raise money when you're ready to scale. So keep things as lean as possible. Don't go spend 10 grand a month on marketing consultants or digital ads before you have a product built. Don't go, hire somebody to do FDA approval in the earliest stages of a med tech startup if you're not really there yet. And so I think that people, when they sort of raise money, they start to spend it really quickly. Or if they're putting in their own money, they spend it really, really quickly. But do as much of it as you can and dish out equity early on so that you can keep things lean from a cash flow standpoint, so that when you do go to scale and you do go to raise, you're sort of more equipped and you're not as thirsty for any kind of money or any check.
I like that. I like that. Yeah. So again, coming from that standpoint of, power when you're raising as opposed to desperation, I think that definitely makes a huge difference. But that being said, getting back to your point on build, I'm curious about, what stage you're in with literally helping startups. As a founder yourself, it sounds like your mission and, platform itself is kind of evolving. So can you talk to me a little bit about where you are today and how you kind of plan to grow and scale in the future?
Yeah, for sure. We really want to just start by helping the ecosystem. And so the first thing we did was just throw together a Calendly link and start hosting events and start going to events and just really just meeting with every founder we could. And we find that this really influences the products and the community that we want to build. I've seen some community platforms out there charging $100 for founders a month, and it's a lot of money for a founder. And I've seen people charging $5,000 for a pitch deck. And, people are paying this because they don't always know better. And so we want to be the first name you think of when you go to build a startup, to provide honest, unbiased feedback in a way that you can trust it, because we're founders ourselves and because we have nothing to gain. So, 95 to 99% of the founders we meet with never give us a dollar, and we never take a point of equity. And so that's what we want to kind of keep as the mission. And we want to become that sort of name. But the things we're building out, platform, scalable products, community, all of these things are we're in the sort of nation pieces of it, and they're slowly starting to build out all of these things.
What excites you most about what you're building?
We think that the ecosystem is broken. We think that we've noticed that so many founders who are good storytellers and who are well connected are the ones who are raising money and raising crazy amounts. We just saw that pre-seed, French AI company raised $113 million that had been around for 4 weeks. I don't think that there's anything that's really worth investing in unless you have defensible IP, which in the AI space isn't really there. And so those are just people who are well connected, former, Googlers, former Facebook or Meta employees. And I think that we need to stop betting on the optics, which I think is a huge thing that VCs do, and they bet on due diligence by proxy. So if Sequoia or Bessemer's in on the deal, you can get any VC to cut you a check. And we think that that's really broken, because I found founders who they're growing 3 to 5x in the exercise space, and they are struggling to raise, and they have an amazing product doing 7-figure revenue, have hardware margins. And I've seen other B2B SaaS founders who are just exploding, and they struggle to raise because they didn't have that network and on a personal level. And so we want to bridge the gap between sort of VCs who are kind of breaking the mold and really trying to invest in the companies that are actually growing, and those founders that are really building really impressive things. So we kind of want to act as this middle point in terms of network creation and platform to sort of bridge the gap in every way we can. We can have a little bit more of a conversation if you're up for it, but curious to hear about what are the trends you've seen with founders. You speak to lots of founders. What have you sort of noticed that people struggle with the most?
Whoa, Jonny, flipping the table here. I like it. I talk to founders about, I do get a lot of advice, and I think I want to focus a little bit more on that's been given. And, most advice that I hear from founders, and I guess it is, sourced in their challenges, is around continuing to use customer discovery as a tool for building a platform, if that's the product itself. So, the most successful founders that I've talked to, they always focus on, customer discovery as a continuous process. So I would say that would be the biggest takeaway and action item from, the founders that I've spoken with.
Yeah, no, that kind of reminds me of one of the things I always say to founders, which is don't hide it build alongside your clients. And when you build alongside, they will give you advice every step of the way, especially if they're really struggling with the problem. So you can go
Right.
ahead and say like, all right, like you're struggling with this problem. I'm building a product to solve this problem. Tell me while I'm building it what features you want to see. And then, if you have even 4 or 5, then they're going to be the evangelists that are most excited about it when you do launch. And so one of the adages I always say is, VCs always say, oh, good ideas are painkillers, not vitamins. But I like to take it a
Mhm.
step further. Like, you don't just need somebody who's suffering pain from this problem. You need somebody who's like has a stab wound and is bleeding out from it, and like find that person that is so desperate for anything to fix this problem that they will work with you as you sort of launch your beta, as you're kind of building out, your early MVP. Because if you do that, then they're invested in it because there's nothing else sort of out there helping them.
Well, thank you so much again for your feedback, Jonny, and for this advice and for the question. That was pretty fun.
Yeah,
I hope that we can talk again sometime soon.
for sure. Sounds good.